All right, great constructor. Acts 17, verse 26. The question comes in, Keith. I love your questions, man. I almost think sometimes they're stump the preacher questions, but I love them.
Yeah, it's wonderful. Thank you.
Man, I love the challenge. That's what part of this program's about. But he writes, my question is about Acts 17:26. NIV version uses from one man. King James version uses one blood. What does the original manuscript say and the meaning? All right, so that's a good question. I love to see that. One of the things I do want to say when we say original manuscript, realize that we can talk about the USB. We can talk about the Textus Receptus. Am I getting these right? Mm-hmm. All right. I haven't used these in a while, but these are a combination of many, many, many manuscripts. And so I just want to throw that out there that sometimes when we say, well, what does the manuscript, we can have confidence because we have many, many, many manuscripts that are used to record this for us.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, that's been the purpose of several people over the course of the last 500-600 years of compiling those manuscripts into New Testament, what do you call that? New Testament compilations, where they've taken those manuscripts that you mentioned, UBS, the Textus Receptus, and so those are a combination or a collection of manuscripts, and so it depends on who they're appealing to for the translation. For example, the NIV is going to use the UBS or something like that, and so
that's a USB.
Yeah.
If you did, I just blew right over it.
Thank you. UBS. Well, that's why I looked at you, because I was like, I don't think that's right. But anyway, USB. Thank you.
United Bible Society.
UBS.
And so they go to that one, and they'll translate from what they see there. But then the Textus Receptus might have a little bit variation because they use some different manuscripts. But either way, looking this up, the word that's there, that's in question, is two words. One of them is the word blood, and it's the word in the Greek is aima, or haima.
Haima, yeah.
And so when it's talking about all of one blood, and then right next to it, it has the word pas, which means all. And then there's the word ethnos. And that's what's interesting or fascinating. That's where we get our word ethnicity.
I was going to say ethnicity.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so then that here is translated, the word ethnos is translated a race, nations, people. And sometimes it depends on how it's being used, but sometimes it's used as foreigners. In other words, when they say foreigners, they're talking about those that are not Jewish descent, because the Old Testament's very specific about that. So going back to the question, is Acts 17:26 from one man, or the King James, one blood, what does the original manuscript say and the meaning? So I think to answer your question, Keith, again, great question. According to what I'm looking at, and I have on my program, Bible program, it shows the variances. And so it shows that there is a question there, that the Textus Receptus, which is what the King James and New King James uses one word, but then that word is not found in the UBS, the Nestle Aland, and things like that, the other collections of manuscripts.
And so but one of the things I'll point out, there is no contradiction between these, because both ways are recording the same concept. That's from one, God created every nation. And that's the context of what he's trying to hear in preaching in Athens, trying to emphasize to the people.
That's right. Yeah, that's one of the key things you just brought out. You need to look at the context, because a lot of times the context will tell you how the word is being used. I would like to make a recommendation, is get a New American Standard. A lot of times the New American Standard Bible will take and it'll put it in brackets, the word that's in question. So like the NIV, for example, it'll change the word or put it in a footnote, whereas the NASB will typically put that in a bracket. So you can see that there's a difference. But again, it doesn't change the meaning, or doesn't change the emphasis there.
And and I think that's one of the biggest things in the translations that we get into sometimes is, somebody says, well, it needs to be this word, good, great. Good's not even the right word. Great gospel preacher, I'm not going to call him out. I know he really loves the word Calvary. And that's fine, because the word Calvary, Troy, when we were talking about this, is really a translation with dealing with the Septuagint. But if you go back to the original, you deal with the idea of translating it as Golgotha. Now, both are good translations of it, but both are dealing with the concept of the place of the skull. And so being able to just go back to the original language and see that sometimes things are translated differently, not necessarily a right versus wrong. And some people prefer certain things, like, baptism, baptizo. Yeah, and we think about the transliteration of it, but there are some translations of the Bible that will actually translate that as immersion. Is the baptism a wrong translation of it? And I guess we could argue it's not really a translation.
Transliteration.
It's a transliteration, but I do like the translations that will say immersion in place of that.
Yeah.
So, great question, Keith. I hope that answers it. If not, let us know. We'll try and revisit it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's another thing I'm glad you said that, because if we don't answer your question or we misunderstand your question, be sure and let us know.
Yeah, that can happen really easy.
Yeah.